Welcome back to the Varsity Voices. We are the podcast that gives high school sports and the Chicago Catholic League the spotlight they deserve. I'm your co-host, Joe Frevaletti, along with your other co-host, Dan Frevaletti. Today's episode is one you won't want to miss. Joining us is one of the most respected voices in Illinois high school football, Steve Soucie, the managing editor for Friday Night Drive at Shaw Media. Steve has spent decades covering the game, breaking down matchups, providing playoff predictions, spotlighting talent, and shaping the conversation around high school football in the state of Illinois. Whether you're a coach, a player, or a diehard fan of Friday Night Lights, get ready for an insightful look at the trends, teams, and talent defining the high school football landscape in Illinois. Steve, I would like to welcome you to the Varsity Voices. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate the invitation.
If you are looking to buy or sell a home, contact RE/MAX Realtor and Circle of Legends recipient Christopher Cobb. Let Chris's extensive negotiating experience work to guide you on all of your real estate buying and selling needs. Contact Christopher now to discuss the right strategy for your personalized real estate buying and selling plan. His number is 630-420-0070, or you can visit his website at christophercobb.com.
So you've been covering high school football in Illinois for a long time, Steve. What first drew you to it, and what keeps you coming back year after year?
Well, I mean, I guess the origin story of where I found out about high school football was I actually went to a high school that did not have football. So I didn't play football in high school. So it wasn't an opportunity for me. It was before co-ops became popular because I'm old. So just in a nutshell. So I actually had started I had started a part-time job at the Kankakee Daily Journal, and they were, there was a once upon a time, some small schools would play their varsity football games on Wednesday night. So they were asking about a small school that the editor at the time was asking about a small school and asked if anybody wanted to go to this Wednesday night football game. I was a high school senior at the time when I took this job, and apparently nobody else wanted to go. And I was like, sure, I'll go. So I went to Tri-Point High School to watch them play Lexington, which are two schools that no longer have individual varsity football games. It was played on a field that was surrounded by corn, and I was hooked almost from the first minute. And it's pretty shocking that I was, because as soon as I got out into the parking lot, my car would not start, and I had to call my father to drive down to Colum to get me back from that game. Turned out my car was dead, and I never drove it again after that night. So the fact that I was hooked after all the bad things that happened to me that night, it wasn't a particularly competitive football game, but that was what caught my interest, and ever since it was like I would take any assignment they wanted to give me, and I took it with flourish and just tried to enjoy everything about it. And that was in 1991. So that was the first time that I had undertaken. I'd only actually, prior to that assignment, I'd only actually seen in person one high school football game.
Huh.
Wow. Well, you've evolved quite a bit since then, as far as knowing the game. You've had your finger on the pulse of the football playoffs in Illinois for some time. You've from predicting what teams will be in the class to who needs to win when, and all the way down to potential matchups. So you talked about your beginning as far as covering high school football. When did it evolve, or when did it start getting into the level of detail that you're able to provide now?
Well, I'll give you the origin story of how I became what I am. I often refer it to as a Disney sports movie for nerds. In the fall of 1993, I was getting phone calls in the office at about 1 o'clock in the morning from a football coach looking for these scores that we had on the AP wire. And he would call every time, and he knew that I was interested in this kind of stuff. So he would call and he would ask for me. late on Friday evenings into Saturday morning, 1:00 in the morning, whatever it was. And he was asking me for all these strange scores. And I was like, finally, after about 3 weeks, I was like, why are you looking for these, coach? And then I wasn't all that familiar with how the playoff system worked. But, he's told me, he says, I think we've got a really good football team this year. We're riding that bubble between 2A and 3A, and we're trying to figure out if we're going to make the 2A state field or the 3A field. And these are the games that I need to know so I can sit here and try to figure out who the 32 teams are that are going to get into 2A and who are going to get into 3A. So we did this every week, and then I started to get more interested in it. And then, I'm like, wait a minute. I think I can figure this out. I can start to figure this out myself. Ironically, we went through that whole process that year. Coal City was the school in question. They snuck into the 2A field as the largest school, and they won the 2A state championship. So the coach was right. So all of that finagling just kind of caught my – granted, I got more interested in it when I saw the actual result of what he was studying in it and actually panned out the way that it did exactly what he was saying. So I was like, boy, I think this might be interesting for people if I kind of started to chart this. And over time, I started to get a little bit of a cult following with it because I was the only crazy person willing to do this. Because before, now I have it pretty technically advanced. I have some spreadsheets that do a lot of the math. No joke. I used to literally have a printed out sheet of everybody in the state that was playing football sorted by enrollment. And I would sit there and I would chart it every week and I would change it and I would chart every single game and I'd sit there and I'd cross them out and I'd count. And now I do all that stuff through spreadsheets. So it's a lot faster and easier. But I used to have, no joke, I used to have a shoebox filled with the schedules of every single team in the state of Illinois with individual football schedules. And every week I would go through W, L, W, L, and I would have them sorted in a stack and I would pull them out. I had them numbered and I would pull them out. They're out, they're in, they're out, they're in until I got to 256. And then I had my fields and then I broke it down that way. So I've become a lot more technically advanced with it, but the origin story of why I got involved in this originally stretches back to the 1993 football season with the Coal City Cougars.
Yeah, and what was your vision when you launched Friday Night Drive? I'm sure there was the initial vision, and now it's evolved over time, obviously. So, what was your initial vision for Friday Night Drive?
Well, what it really came down to was, I started. I was at the Kankakee paper for over 20 years, and it was one of those things where, I started to get a little bit of following. One of the things that started to get me a little bit more following is pretty early on in that run, I sent a blind email to Edgy Tim and said, hey, is this something that you would be interested in for your site? Because we really, at the time, we really hadn't figured out like the best ways to do this kind of stuff on the internet and stuff like that. So I developed a friendship with him, and over time, people got to me through Edgy, and started to follow my stuff, and it became one of those things. I made several appearances on the IHSA playoff pairing show, but after a long time at Kankakee, I left the Kankakee newspaper and moved on to other things. I wasn't a full-time sports writer for about a year and a half, but around now we're going on. Let's see. I'm trying to think what we're at. In the summer of 2018, I left and I became the sports editor at the Joliet Herald News. So for the first time, I had a company that I was working for that was very metric based. They were able to track like what people were interested in. So the first time that I ran a playoff projection early in the season, it exploded. It was getting all kinds of hits, and people were telling me they hadn't seen anything like this. And this was early in the season. I'm like, well, I hate to tell you this, guys, but over the next couple of weeks, it's going to get bigger because that's what always happens. And it did. And that was and then after that year, one of the higher ups there said, I think there's an opportunity here for a football centric driven website with what you're doing as kind of the anchor to what we're doing in that website. Um, and so we launched the site. It was, almost immediately met with pretty strong response. People really like what we're doing. Um, and it just kind of, it's created a community where people that are really passionate about the game, and there are a lot of people out there that very much are.
Oh yeah.
That it gives them a lot of detail and opportunity to, kind of dive into programs that maybe aren't from your area that you might not know about. We try to give a comprehensive look at as many programs and areas as we can. And some of it is institutional knowledge. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. So a lot of what I do in the projections is based on kind of knowing, like, what the history of this says. And obviously, there's some teams that jump up out of nowhere that you're not expecting from a year to year basis. But a lot of this stuff is very repeatable. You can get kind of a look at, hey, conferences, this is usually the way it goes. And as the season goes along, you can make adjustments to that. But having kind of that knowledge and knowing, what the history of these programs are and in regards to how they compete, that's something that I've cultivated literally over, at this point, nearly, 25 years of year by year results and kind of getting a feel for what these programs are about. And that's kind of where it came from. And the vision for Friday Night Drive was just to kind of create a full clearinghouse of all of the information that we have over multiple papers in Shaw that cover a lot of quality programs, and just kind of give you a one-stop shop if you're interested in knowing what happened in Friday Night Football around the state. We've got an awful lot of it there for you if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's well, it's what prompted me to reach out this week. Your article in Shaw Media this week focuses on a 2025 playoff predictions, which I'm here for all day, by the way. That I'm like consumer A for that. And you discuss how you can predict between 70 and 80% accuracy based on history. Other than the model that you discuss in the article, are there other factors that you look at? Are you looking at? I'm guessing you're not looking at lower level records from previous years or anything like that. It is strictly based on the model and the history, especially for this article.
Well, yeah, for this one in particular, I am basing it almost exclusively on the 3-year win model.
Yeah.
That's a predictive analysis that, like, there's been times where it's been a little bit better, but safely, I mean, you can safely guess on about 80% of the teams that qualify for the playoffs from a year-to-year basis are probably going back the next year. So in that model, you can figure out some things like where these teams are likely to figure out. And it just kind of works out that way. I just think for this particular exercise, it's very interesting, particularly this year with so many teams adding multipliers and some pretty substantial enrollment changes in the field. That was what I found so interesting about this exercise this year, kind of looking at the way the classes look a lot different with those teams and their new classifications and how some of those brackets stack up a lot differently. That's what I think is interesting about this exercise. But once we go into like the regular season, and I talk about this on a regular basis, that first playoff projection that comes out in late August after the first week of games are over, that's entirely based on the information that I'm getting. I literally sit down based on that first week's result and then project over 2,000 games for the rest of the season. I project the rest of the games of the season based on the week 1 results and what I currently believe about those teams. So that's when I start going through all of it. Obviously, it gets easier as the season goes along because there are less games to project. But every single week, I go through the remaining games, project it based on the knowledge that I currently have on each individual team on those situations. Sometimes I change, sometimes I flip-flop, and that's why you see teams go up or down the bracket or in and out. And sometimes it can be a simple change. It can be something that I saw just in that 1 week result that makes me go, hey, what's going on with them. And even if I can't find out specifically what the reason was for something happening, I have a lot of people out there that reach out to me and tell me, hey, they lost their quarterback or they lost this or that or the other. But the process in week one is simply that I take a look at those teams, evaluate what I believe, what that week one result meant, and then take it against their other remaining 8 games. Do the same thing the next week. Just go down, and eventually it becomes a little bit faster and a little bit quicker and a little bit easier to do. But that first week one takes me forever. Like it literally, it takes me so long because there's just so much data that I have to go through and kind of generate in my mind how it goes. But the thing about it is, and that has been the reason that I do it is the response that I get from people for doing it. That's, I mean, I'm a little bit crazy about it. And somebody said you need to stop doing it. I don't know if I physically could. I'm so it's so ingrained in me now that like I can't see a situation where like where I wouldn't want to do it because it's the reception that I get.
You know, I was thinking about that, and you mentioned, you know, the how many people reach out. I was going to ask what publishing this type of article does to your email inbox.
Oh, it's one of those things that's funny because it's like we have kind of a time schedule that we've generated on it, especially late in the season. If we're late when we drop those, we typically drop them on Tuesdays. If we're late for whatever reason, we had a technical problem 2 years ago, and my phone was blowing up, my email was blowing up.
Right.
Where are they? It's 10 o'clock. Where are they at? You know, so yeah, and it's funny because it always amazes me how much traffic both the site get and the interest level that I have on Saturday morning before the playoffs are announced. Because I'm like, guys, this is just a projection. It's not what's going to happen. But sometimes I've been so accurate with it that sometimes I actually feel like I know at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, this is what I think the field's going to be. And sometimes I've been dead on. So, but people are contacting me like, what do you got? What do you got? You still got this? You still got this? And I'm like, guys, just wait 3 hours. We're going to find out. I mean, it's like, I'm not drawing the brackets. Like, they are.
People think that you're getting the phone calls from the IHSA.
It's just like, I'm like, I'm not drawing these guys. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's the entertaining part about it. But yeah, it's the one thing that I've learned the most out of this process is the community is great. The high school football community in Illinois is great because, I mean, I've gotten so much support and positivity from those people that it makes me feel like even though this is a Herculean task, it feels appreciated. It feels like it's something that the community really relies on and enjoys, and that fuels me. It's a crazy 9 week, and sometimes it does feel it is a little bit of a grind, but I just really enjoying capturing. You know, I've made a lot of friendships with people through this, and people that I would have never met if I hadn't started doing this when I did it. And to be honest with you, I think sometimes, I mean, I feel like I do a good job, but I feel like part of the reason that I have the job that I do, that I love my job, is this process. This is what has brought me to where I am now. This has, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm always thankful that people receive it the way that they do.
So we have a particular focus, especially during the football season, on the Chicago Catholic League, Steve. And as I'm listening to you talk about, you know, your early season predictions, I'm thinking about the Chicago Catholic League, and we've described it as a meat grinder of a schedule, and so do the coaches as well. I mean, that's just one term. We've used others as well regarding the schedule. How hard is it to project the Chicago Catholic League, considering the talent, the different programs in the league, and how things change from year to year? There's a couple of teams, obviously, you can count on from year to year that are going to be there, but there's that number of teams kind of in the middle of the conference that it's just really hard to project, I would think.
Well, I think the one example that I've used from last year that was so interesting to me was DePaul Prep. You know, they had not had much of a history. So each time that they would pick off one of those wins, it was like, was that a fluke? or are they for real? Like every week, it was kind of like, am I sure about this now? And it took me a long time to get on board because I kept telling myself, okay, maybe that was a pretty good win. I mean, what's next? What's next? And then like they just kind of kept winning those games, and I'm like, well, okay, but you're right. It seems like every year there are a group of teams that are sitting there, and sometimes the list grows as long as 10 or 11, where you're like, are they going to be able to get to 5? Because I can see a scenario where this team finishes 3-6, or this team finishes 7-2, or they finish in the middle because all of their games, it's like they're not maybe 50-50 toss-ups, but in my mind, they're 52-48 toss-ups. They're the kind of game where one turnover can change the whole outcome of the game. It's like I think sometimes from week to week, that's where I spend the most time kind of picking through those games going, okay, what do I think? Because I can't remember. I get confused on the colors sometimes when I'm not in it all the time. But there was one division in particular that like I try to do kind of like a soft power ranking in my head for each conference. And there was one conference that I swear in the Catholic League every week that 1, 2, 3, 4 would change every single week. I did not have the same order. I almost never had the same number 1. It was like every week I would flip it around and then I would just move it back around again. And then I'd get a result that would change my thought process again. And then I'd have to move them around again. So there are certain divisions in that league that, to be honest with you, I kind of think of them as, okay, 2 of these are probably going to finish 5-4, and 2 of these are going to finish 4-5. And I spend all year trying to figure out which ones are the 5-4s and which ones are the 4-5s.
Right.
I think I counted 18 in that article, 18 Chicago Catholic League schools, and some with, based on the history factor. We talked a lot right after the playoffs, and it was a hot topic about, the public versus private. And, with this model, and Joe has always said, since we've been doing this, that the IHSA can change things. The more they change, the more they remain the same. And I count 18 teams spread across like 3A to 8A. Heavily weighted in the larger classes, but man, if it comes down to 2 private schools, maybe not even CCL, but 2 private schools in a few of these classes, what do you think the reaction of the IHSA will be?
It's one of those things now where I think that basically this whole process with the multipliers and the multiplier waivers and kind of strengthening that a little bit, because I think some of the problems that we had last year where there was a lot of outcry about the private school dominance and all this other stuff, I think some of it was born out of the fact that there were several teams that I think in most people's opinions were playing in classifications that they simply should not have been playing in. And so I think some of the corrections and amendments that they made will kind of help towards that. And at some point, I mean, if you want to have a system where you have the privates and publics, and that's a discussion that could take all day, where you have them separated or you want them together, at some point, I hate to use the word punishment because that's not what it is, but when you have teams going up the ladder and using the success formula, at some point, how far do you want it to go? Like, either you want to be able to, manage that situation, or you don't. And I know a lot of people push for, hey, put them in their own classification. The rules aren't the same, and all this other stuff. I would hate to see that personally, because I think that would be a situation where you would have, watered down state championships. But I also don't think that the situation that we went through last year is tenable. Like, I don't think you can continue to do it the way that it was done. So I think we have to keep tinkering with the system to try to find a way to find something that where it's not causing an outcry every year. You're never going to find a system that everyone is happy with. That's the reality of the situation. I think, we've danced around doing districts and things like that in the past. And I think I know as well as anyone has what some of the ramifications of districts might be. That would not be good for Illinois high school football without making some sort of major overhaul to the plans that had been attempted before. So it's a really tricky slope. Like I said, I don't think there's anything that makes everyone happy, but I think, pushing those programs up that have had some success and making them compete at the higher classes is a step in the right direction. I think I don't think the complaining's ever going to go away fully, ever. I mean, I don't think there's any system that we could build other than possibly separating the classes. And I honestly don't think all public schools want that. I
Right.
think they don't want the situation that we had last year where we've got a team at 1A that's got, 5 Power 5 kids on the roster competing against a school that has been very, very good, but looking completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
That's not what the system was designed to do. Like 1A is supposed to be for schools that, that maybe they have one, you know, athlete that is, a once in a decade type of athlete. But I mean, mismatches like those, nobody wants to see that. Even the team that's winning it doesn't want that in a state championship game.
So, what are your thoughts, Steve? Some of the current kind of trending things in high school sports, and I'm thinking of some of the transfer type rules, the right to play. NIL is starting to rear its head out there at the high school level. From a transfer standpoint, I know the IHSA is trying to keep some guardrails around that, but it seems to be getting more and more difficult. I think if you let that just go, then what we're talking about is we're probably creating some super teams out there, right, in the state, whether they're at 1A or whether they're at 8A. You're going to end up with some haves and some have-nots. I mean, what are your thoughts about what's going on right now in regards to those types of trending things in high school sports?
The transfer thing is always something that I think is going to be a really difficult thing to get a handle on. There's just so many variables to that, and it's like, and I know there are some, things that are people are skirting around the rules, or in some cases just blatantly, not following the rules at all. And that's where, I think it's so hard to come up with. You can fault the IHSA for, maybe not, doing as good a job as they could in policing this. But what a lot of people don't realize is it's not like they've got an army of, 20 or 25 people that they can just send out uh, to look into every questionable sort of transfer type of thing. That's not really the mission of that organization anyway. I mean, they're trying to run, 15 or 20, 25 sports. I mean, several in a year. I mean, they have a relatively small staff. They've basically got to count on, you know, people following the rules. I mean, they simply don't have the personnel to go out and look at all of these things that, are involved in that situation with transfers. So it's getting trickier. I think it's only going to get worse. Is not the. I think it's only going to get slipperier as time goes on. You're starting to see it now a lot more than you would have seen it 5 or 10 years ago. There are transfers being made that are for the sole reason of they think that the opportunity to get collegiate exposure is going to be better at this school. The opportunity for them to put up better stats is going to be there for them at that school. And whether or not they're following the letter of the law in terms of making that transfer is a very difficult thing to police. And it's one of those things where you got to take it on faith that people are following along the way that they're supposed to be doing, because that's really the only way that the whole thing doesn't fall into complete chaos. Because, yeah, are there some bad actors out there? Yep. I mean, and I'm not going to go into who I think some of those are, but yeah, are some people breaking the rules? Yep. But I really don't know how you police it in a way that makes sense. Like that's the thing. You can shriek and scream about it all you want, but I don't really know how you stop someone from saying, "Hey, I think this is a better opportunity for, for my child," or this is just a better fit for us." I don't know who can say, "Hey, no, you can't do that because you decided 2 years ago that this is where you wanted to be." and because you're not happy with that situation, I mean, who's going to be the police of that?
Yeah.
Who's going to decide what is an acceptable reason to be allowed to move and what isn't? That's really what it comes down to for me.
Yeah, and when I mean, you've seen this, we've seen this, and I mean, it's relatively recent. When you don't get the answer you want, you end up in court. And I know the IHSA, they don't have the staff or the resources to be doing that as well. Constantly going to court and trying to get things resolved that way. So it is a very slippery slope. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, in some of the other things with the right to play situation, I think there are a lot of layers to that too. For me personally, I am a passionate advocate of high school sports. So for me, it always bothers me when I see, and I know it's an element that has to be dealt with, but like when I see the club element taking away from, athletes going and doing that, and I know why they have to do it, but when we have the strict rigor of like not allowing club athletes to participate in high school athletics, I'm not necessarily a big fan of that either, because I think there's got to be a way to kind of, have a balance and have kids have the opportunity to participate in those things. Because if you don't, I think you're eventually going to see a lot of some of these sports with lesser participations at the high school level start to die off at the high school level, because it's, if you're losing a lot of your elite athletes to the club teams and the travel teams and all those other things, I think some of them are going to start to pare down. I think you're starting to see that in some other places now. So, it becomes tricky, and I don't know where we're going to go with NIL. I'm interested in it. I just, at this point, I have a feeling that it's going to be one of those things that I'm going to probably end up rolling my eyes at in a few years. But I understand it's a thing to consider. It's like, it's one of these things that, like, 5-10 years ago, we wouldn't have thought about all the social media things that are going on now. That would not have been something you would have been like, hey, this is something that is a big part of, of that whole experience. And now I can't imagine doing these things without it. It's become such a vital component of it. So, like I said, I don't think we're anywhere near. We're just scratching the surface of what that end up might being in the future. And some of it really scares me, and some of it I'm just intrigued to see how it plays out.
Yeah. Along those lines, Joe, I have a question from a fan. Actually, all right. I've got one. All right. So this is, let's see, read it here. What about, in addition to the points system, what do you think of doing something along the lines of a selection committee that is in addition to the point system?
I personally think a lot of people ask me, oh, if you were in charge of it, what would you do? I think there's some improvements that could really be made in the seating process. I'm actually pretty okay with how we figure out who gets in. But the one thing that I don't have a lot of faith in, and I've said this hundreds of times to people, this system says all wins are created equal.
Right.
We all know that they're not. So I personally would like to see some sort of weighted system with wins like put into play in helping us seed. I really would like to see that, because, and I've said this before, there's some layers to it. And I've jokingly told anybody before that if they want to start up some sort of selection seating committee, I'll happily accept a commitment to that committee. I would gladly sign up for it.
We've got 3 right here that would sign up.
So we've talked about that too. Yeah,
that's one of the things that I haven't been approached by anybody in official capacity, but they said, well, what would you think about being involved in something like that if it were to come to fruition? And I'm like, well, absolutely. Because that's, there are things in the current seating system that are just, they aren't right. I think we, if we have the ability to try to put together the best state championship games possible, I think we should try to do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think the current seating system does not allow that to happen. So, I mean, I'll get into the smaller classifications. For the best state championship to happen, we need to go to 1 to 32 right now. But that's a whole other discussion for another day. But I think the seeding process sometimes keeps us from having the best possible state championship games because there's some not so great things in the way it's seeded right now.
Sure.
Yes, as you mentioned at the beginning, you've been covering high school sports, high school football for a long time. And what the coverage was like, or how you covered it when you first started, and where we're at today. And you just mentioned social media and how that's changed things dramatically. How do you see things continuing to evolve that way? And do you think we're entering into like a new era of high school sports coverage?
Yeah, I think, the thing that I've kind of noticed personally from what I do is, just to give you an example, this was my process. It used to be my process. I would get back from whatever game I was covering on Friday night, and I'd start canvassing the statewide scores and trying to put in as many as I could find and staying up way too late on Friday night as I went through this process. And the next day I would get up and I would try to find those missing scores. And that list would maybe be 25 or maybe sometimes even 50 games that I had not been able to find the night before. So, and then I'd get into the weekend and I'd find some of them. And then I would literally have to wait until Monday when the IHSA put out all of their statewide scores for, on the website to find those missing 10 or 12 scores that I could not find over the course of the weekend. This was Monday, mind you. So
Right.
Now that process has completely changed. Friday night, I will go through, I will find the score. I will find a large chunk of the scores. I might be missing maybe 5 or 7 scores. I will put a tweet out saying, hey, I'm missing these 5 or 7 scores. Within 15 minutes, I will have at least 85% of those games, either the score of the game or this was delayed because of lightning, this was postponed until Saturday. I will have all those games literally within 15 minutes. And I usually put that post out at 1 o'clock in the morning. That's how different it is now than it was 10, 15 years ago, is just the swirl of information that you can get comes so much faster. Like it's one of those things where we just, and I think, to be honest with you, it wouldn't surprise me if we keep escalating on that point. I think it's one of the things that we're doing on Friday night now. We're doing the live broadcast, Friday Night Live, where we are tracking, Matt Rodewald and myself are tracking 20 games around the state, the 20 marquee games, and tracking 50 or more like that are going on and finding out in real time, through NHFS feeds, Twitter feeds, whatever, what's going on in these games. And instantaneously, what we're trying to do, we sometimes succeed at this and we sometimes don't. Okay, this game just got over. It was a double overtime game where this team won that was not supposed to win. What does this do? How does this change the playoff landscape? Who might be getting in now that wasn't before? Who's out now? All this stuff. And we're trying to do that in real time. This was something that 10 years ago, I would be doing 2 days after the fact. And I'm doing it in the moment now, which is something that I wouldn't have asked me if I would be able to do that in 2010, 2012. I would have looked at you like you were absolutely nuts. I would have said, there's no way that I can do that. There's way too many variables that I don't know. But now the information's coming in so fast that I have 80% of those variables to know how to answer that question while it's happening. Like we were watching games come down to the wire, and Matt's asking me, okay, if Nazareth wins this game, what does it mean? We didn't think they would. What does it mean for this? How does it factor in? And I'm able to look at what I already know at 11 o'clock on Friday night, which would be information that I wouldn't have had 10 years ago until 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday. So it's just the speed that we're getting this information. It's always been that way in the playoffs. You can track it on Twitter and everybody's updating and all this other stuff. but the sheer volume of regular season games on a Friday night, 10 years ago, it would have been impossible to kind of keep a tracker on all that stuff and figure out what it means. And now I'm doing it almost in real time. Like I take a final score and I'm like 10 minutes later, I know what it means in the fixture of the landscape of the classification, especially late in the season. Like I'm trying to read the tea leaves literally minutes after I get a final score on a game that I thought was a toss-up. So I just think it's one of those things. Like the speed is what we're noticing, and I think it's only going to get faster.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we really appreciate your time. I just have one more question for you, Steve. You've done this a while, and it made me think about the players you've seen. And we all know that there's been a ton of great players. I don't know if you can think of one or two that you've covered or seen during your career that maybe we don't know, that didn't do much or didn't do what was expected in college or make the NFL or anything. But who are a couple of players that you have in your mind that might be underrated, that were just amazing football players over the course of time? Is there anyone that jumps out?
Well, there's a couple, and I mean the one that's the most recent one, Bears fans I think are going to get acquainted with very quickly. I I called I called it my Luther Burden victory tour when he was a senior in high school.
Yeah.
I really had no business seeing Luther Burden as many times as I did in his senior year of high school, because East St. Louis is not close to where I currently live. But I saw Luther Burden play, I believe, in 8 games his senior year, because I enjoyed watching him that much. And I was really excited when the Bears took him. I'm not the biggest Bears fan in the history of the world, but I'm just glad that when I am watching Bears games, he will be there. So that was a really fun one. The other one, a little bit farther back, he didn't have the pro career that I thought that he was going to have, but Crete Moniz Laquan Treadwell was a guy that I thought I saw him make plays after plays after plays that I just did not think that a high school athlete was capable of making. Absolutely incredible. So those were 2 that, like, off the top of my head, I could probably sit here all day and think about other ones.
Yeah.
But we don't have that kind of time, I'm sure.
Right.
So,
right.
but yeah, those are 2 that really kind of jump off the page at me.
All right. So last question, Stephen. You just talked about players. What about games? Any particular games that you still think about to this day that you watched? You've seen a lot of them. I know that.
Yeah, the one that always looks back at me. I'm drawing a blank on what year it was, but it was a state final game between Joliet Catholic and Montini that ended up like 70-55 or something. Joliet Catholic's Ty Isaac ran for like 1 billion yards.
Right.
And I mean, I'm only exaggerating a little bit.
Yeah.
And then on Montini's side, Jordan Westerkamp seemed to be catching passes and racking up receiving yards that, like, even a ridiculous video game probably wouldn't have accounted for those stats. It was just, I was just sitting down there watching it. I actually wasn't even working that game, but it was a ping pong game. It was just zip, zip, big play, big play, big play, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's the one that, like, I always remember when I hear, these are the games that, like, I think of from a stat perspective, because I'm a big stats guy, obviously, and that's the one that kind of comes back to me. There have been a lot of other ones, but that's the one that kind of rings true to me. Hey, that's a game that I won't forget. I mean, and just a couple of years ago, that game with Cary Grove and East St. Louis in the state finals, that's another one that really stood out to me, primarily because very few people gave Cary Grove an opportunity to win that game.
Right.
And boy, they executed almost a perfect game plan in that. So I learned a great lesson that day. Never count out a Brad Seberg Cary Grove team, no matter who they're playing. So, and he's always, I've become friends with Brad, and I've always told him that I said that was a big play to Crow for me, because I was talking a lot before that game where I didn't see how anybody could beat St. Louis, and they went ahead and did it, and they did it almost flawlessly. They played a beautiful game there, and that's one of the reasons why I love high school football, because things like that happen sometimes. They just do, and I've been fortunate to see quite a few of them, and that's one of the things that that when I started this, when I was a high school senior, I never would have imagined that I would have gotten the opportunities that I've gotten to do something that I truly love. Because it was a couple years ago that, and I keep track of these things because I'm a total nerd. I passed 200 different high school football venues that I've seen at least one game in. And then I went through this before, and I'm not sure where I'm at right now, but I think I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of at least one game seen by about 415 of the programs in Illinois high school football. So that's one of the things that I kind of track too. So, but it's I just love it, and I feel blessed every day that this is kind of the core of what I get to do for a living. I think if for whatever reason the job all went away from me, I think I'd still keep doing it because I love it that much.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode of the Varsity Voices. A huge thank you to Steve Soucie for sharing his insight, experience, and passion for high school football here in Illinois. His work with Friday Night Drive continues to elevate the conversation around prep sports and shine a spotlight on the stories that matter most. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, like, and share it with your fellow high school football fans. And don't forget to follow us on social media for more exclusive content, interviews, and behind-the-scenes coverage. Till next time, keep your eyes on the field and your ears on the Varsity Voices.